Okay.
Okay. Hello and welcome to this 18th edition of the International Conference on the Quality of Education. This year's theme is dedicated to highlighting key determinants for improving learning outcomes based on data analysis from teens, peers, and PISA. I am delighted to moderate this closing session with the presence of our guests, Ghita BENKIRANE from France, Hassan SABERE from Kazakhstan, Ivan Matser from Belgium, Netherlands, and Paul Maj from Thailand. Our first presenter will be Dr. Ivan Master from Netherlands.
Okay, thank you. So you have my...
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for inviting me, first of all. It's my honor to speak at this conference. Let's go to the first slide. I'm Ivo Matser. I'm CEO of the Academy of Business and Society in Brussels. I am Dutch. This is a membership organization, briefly, of academia and corporates and more also policymakers. And we focus on the topic, as our name, business and society, which means we try to synergize, and this is better than closing the gap between academia and business in this field of sustainability. And we have many activities like research projects, events. We do certification. We have a sustainability hub to support I would say, the chemistry between corporates and academia to enhance the excellence and the relevance of academic institutions. Next slide. Yeah, that's. So I'm leading now ABIS. My background is I started my career in business, publishing business, consulting business. And the last 20 years, I was leading schools in the Netherlands, like Twente School of Management, in Lithuania, ISM, Slovenia, IDC, and Germany and the UK, for GISMA also in Germany. So I'm myself, as ABIS, is a kind of hybrid person between academia and corporates. And that's why I like the topic of today very much. We can go to the next slide. Teaching practices to improve the quality of learning. So this is my first content slide. Is quite important. On purpose, I did not call the title teaching. I call the title learning. And I think that will be the key conclusion of my speech. First of all, what is the purpose of education? And of course, we have many professionals in our audience, so I don't have to explain a bit, but maybe just to have a comment here. First of all, we are there for employability and for competence development and knowledge development of students. And more we see it in lifelong learning, which means institutions are very much into optimizing processes of teaching and research. What I see in my direct stakeholders of schools, many schools, they are becoming more or less a kind of operational excellence organizations focused on the teaching. I think especially in this time and all kind of uncertainty where we live, but it should be always the purpose of education, and that is that academic institutions are also a think tank for transformation and innovation. The place to be, to think, critical thinking, to think about the future, about I would say the uncertainty, and to explore the future is one of the most important tasks for education. What I see in many high competitive markets is that I think too many academic institutions are forgetting a bit the second purpose, the think tank, and focus too much only on the employability of students, which is a short-term policy. And it would be good, and I think it's also important for learning methods, because my speech will in the end go over learning methods, to think less about optimizing processes of teaching. We can go to the next slide, yes. So the keywords for me are excellence and relevance. And excellence is, of course, the quality. That's also the tradition of accreditation bodies. And the relevance is an interesting balance, especially in academic institutions. Because it's balancing fundamental research and academic freedom. On one hand, in many countries, academic freedom is regulated in the law. And on the other hand, meeting the market needs. And sometimes this is not the same. I think the academic freedom is mainly relevant for the knowledge creation, and there is always a need for that. At the same time, focusing on the relevance and about stakeholders, business environment, policy environment. My background is, by the way, business school, so I'm a bit biased. I'm not an experienced manager of institutions in physics or chemistry or medicine. My focus is business schools, and I think the relevance are many cases forgotten, but that also fundamental research in the unknown, where you don't know before what is relevant or not, is important to explore innovations, to explore this think tank part of institutions. In the knowledge transfer, we talk about teaching, and teaching is, I think, not the same as learning. Teaching as a teacher's faculty perspective is how to bring knowledge, but how to learn, how to do your personal growth, your personal development, the learning journey, is a perspective of students. This is more a market orientation, and teaching, I think, is more supply orientation. So it's again here also on the relevance, meeting stakeholders' needs, and again, this long-term perspective is, I think, a bit lacking in many institutions, because they've focused too much on optimization of teaching, big groups, efficient, and efficiency is not always the best, I would say, driving force in academic institutions, simply because the think tank part cannot be operational excellence. We can go to the next slide. So the context of learning, related to what I mentioned before, is what is the role of the institution, and up-to-date research and informed teaching, research-informed teaching. I make a difference in, by the way, in fundamental research and also in teaching. I believe that the added value of academic institutions is that there is research, and it should be connected, at least it can be connected to teaching. So I strongly believe in research-informed teaching, also for, and maybe especially for universities of applied science. They need more focus in research than full universities. It means that the institution is a supplier and a facilitator. The The second one the second one is the learning journey of students, and there we have a learner's process. And there we have to deal with individuals who might have all different kind of learning preferences, how they learn. I will come back later about the effectiveness of learning processes. But here it's about the professional growth and learning how to learn. This is quite a didactical approach. We can call it double loop learning, but it's very important to educate and to explore with students that they find out how they learn themselves effectively. Some people learn the most from copying other people, some people learn from reading, some people learn from gaming, from play, and many ways of the transformation of knowledge, but there are many ways also how people individual learn. And there are many models. I won't repeat all the models, I will show a few, but just to have an overview. Here we have also the meeting the stakeholder needs, and here we see that institutions need to involve society for the labor market. This has to do with the employability also, but also to focus on the future society. And especially, I think now in this time where we have many transitions, where we go for climate change, but we see many bad things about viruses, the pandemic. We see on the political global arena many crises. So there is really a need for rethink many systems, organizations, etc. And of course, we have the employability and the impact on society for the knowledge transfer. And it means that this has to do also with how to learn, that education is about competence development, about a think tank, but also to educate students or learners in their responsibility of continuous learning, or lifelong learning, but to feel this responsibility and to be able to be self-reflective. One of the biggest things, what big companies at the moment ask from students, if, for example, do they know themselves? Can they reflect on themselves? Are they able to collaborate with totally different people, not their own group or their own peers, but really across boundaries, I would say. We can go to the next slide. So here we see the learning outcomes is this is in white. Is a combination of knowledge, the learning perspective, and the context. So the knowledge is again back to research-informed education, practical and critical. On the other hand, is the learner's perspective. You could say that the knowledge part is the supply part, and the learner's perspective is the demand part of this ecosystem. And the context is everywhere different. This is related to countries, to culture, international. The context is also becoming to have sustainable education and sustainable management education. This is the context, which means when we talk about teaching, the teaching part is just a little part of the whole ecosystem. And for effective learning and effective learning methods, it's needed to consider the whole ecosystem. Okay. So the what I see in many also accreditation bodies is that teaching is teaching, and that not all academic institutions are that, I would say, brilliant or educated in didactical methods. And it is, I think we all know, at least I think most of us will know, and this is the 70-20-10 model, is that the effectiveness of classroom teaching in general, of course there are exceptions, there are situations, but big classroom with 50 or 100 or sometimes 200 or 300 students, the effectiveness is only 10%. That's not but because I think, that's just based on research, which means this is a typical result of operational excellence and efficiency. It's very efficient, it's very cheap to organize, just a big room, one professor and many students in the room, but the effectiveness is extremely low. How people really learn is learning by doing. This is the 70%. So practicing, just do it. And that's, I think, the dimension of what in many cases is lacking. And maybe we cannot even blame institutions for that, because the whole system is like that. In accreditations and all kind of systems, we focus on teaching hours, on workload, on contact hours, and everything was not visible in the classroom. We don't see it as learning. We see it, and this 20% is learning from others, which means this is group work, this is case studies. So the 10 and the 20 is organized within the buildings or within the infrastructure of an institution, and the 70% is let them work and let them practice. So this part of this experiential learning. More or less is the same you see in this triangle. The effectiveness of teaching is the traditional teaching, like a classroom, one teacher and many students, is the less effective. Of course, there are situations where it's needed, typically, for example, for instructions or when it's not too complicated. But when it goes really about understanding and applying knowledge and to apply different knowledge in different situation, then the typical classical teaching mode is not effective, and that's a pity. And then again, the pressure on cost saving, the pressure on operational excellence, for many reasons, doesn't help really institutions to have effective learning. But there may be light in the end of the tunnel. So I strongly believe in situational learning. So the left is a model of Kolb. Many people will know it. I won't explain it further, but you see here the first models of Kolb are about 4 learning styles. But we can even see there are 9 learning styles, which means there is a lot of research and a lot of knowledge about when to use and what situation, what learning style. What are the most objectives of learning outcomes, and based on the outcomes, you can select those learning styles. And on the other hand, also personalized learning. And that again, the first graph, this 9 blocks, is related to a didactical concept of what is the purpose of a module or a topic, or what should they learn. Okay, in this situation, I have 9 categories of didactical methods, which widens the scope only in learning and case studies and group work. It really widens the scope. And on the other hand, we have an individual. This is not a didactical question. This is a psychological question: how people learn, and trying to make it personalized. In a traditional way of working, where we have classrooms and buildings, etc., then everything what is flexible and what is personalized is expensive. So this is a kind of theoretical wishful thinking that is impossible to implement in the traditional business model of institutions, simply because it's too expensive. But technology may help, and also maybe to change the business model and the whole concept of education. Then we go to the next slide. So there are barriers to implement this, as I mentioned, mostly because of, first of all, I think the operational excellence pressure on institutions and on faculty. So first of all, the business models for schools are based on group size. I think when an institution decides to start a program or to end the program is mainly based on how many students do we have. Maybe not the market need, but just do we have sufficient scale? This is typical, not a learner's perspective. This is a kind of industrial approach of an academic institution, which doesn't sound that nice, I think. A second barrier is that I know many systems how to about the workload and therefore also the salary system of faculty. And in many cases, it is directly related to the workload from teaching hours physically, like contact hours. Which means there's also a financial thing that I spoke with many faculty members and professors that there is also a barrier from that perspective. Because if we have learning methods maybe more effective and maybe less contact hours, it's less workload, which means the professor will pay the bill, which is not fair for innovations. The same story for accreditations. I just had a whole morning about with a famous accreditation body, and everything is about workload, and it should be minimum so many hours. The same, many cases also regulated by the ministries or in the law about teaching hours, workload of professors, and this is all of those indicators are quantitative, all based on more. What I see in, for example, I'm board member of a welfare organization in the Netherlands, and then we see kindergarten, we have for care also primary schools. And there, when I do a site visit in those locations, I see many creative didactical methods. It's for me interesting to see that the competence of didactical didactical competences in higher education is lower than on a lower level than I would say primary education or kindergarten, etc. Well, to end the speech about what are the barriers not nice, there should be solutions. I think first of all, it is possible to turn around the model from big classrooms. This is not a real change. This is more or less backward planning. I've experienced with MBA programs where we worked with batches of 5 students with their own schedule, but with comparable learning styles, etc. And they meet for efficiency. The efficiency is always a bit needed. They meet all the peer groups. So you can also turn it around and say, okay, I have batches of 5 students, but there are many situations where they meet, for example, for an instruction, other groups to create this efficiency. So that's the other way around from thinking from big groups and then to specializations. You can also think from peer group / specializations and to let them meet. Another thing is digitalization, data collection, etc. Personalized teaching is in the digital world easier and cheaper than ever before. It's to tailor programs, to tailor schedules is becoming affordable and effective. And it sounds maybe a bit strange, but we can. It's not nice to make a comparison with industry, but maybe it's interesting to see when you buy a kitchen or you buy a car, you think you have your own car. It's only made for you because of all the different kind of options and selections you can make. But it's this because of digital data-driven manufacturing. it's extremely cheap to make differentiation and to think that you have your special thing. The other thing is also in the system, the HR system, the faculty remuneration system, is not to calculate workload anymore on contact hours or teaching hours, but I developed this system in Germany for a business school to connect the workload of professors to the credits of students. And how they do it, I don't care. Which means that it's more on balance, and the faculty members can manage their own didactical concepts. So, of course, more experiential learning, which means also more connection with stakeholders, more external oriented. You cannot organize experiential learning without partners. And if we would do this in institutions, then it's good to involve also accreditation bodies that the system of accreditations is consistent with innovations in systems in institutions. You cannot change institutions if accreditation bodies cannot re-accredit you. That's impossible. And there would be, I remember some institutions we had every week so-called brown bag sessions where researchers share their research outcomes, share their projects, share their problems in research, many things. But I didn't see many situations or events or workshops where teachers share experiences in the didactical thing. So I think also faculty development is not only research methods and also focusing on content, academic content, but it will be really good to develop more and more professional didactical concepts in academic institutions. And I also go look at your kids at the primary school. They're much more creative, and that might be a nice source for inspiration for innovations at schools. And how this is only about sharing. We live in a sharing economy. It would be good to make an academic institution like an ecosystem, which means open and breathing with the environment, involving stakeholders, involving suppliers for digital personalized learning. You need IT suppliers, you need data suppliers. In too many cases, I see academic institutions as a kind of self-sufficient or self-organized institutions, but to make it open, to breathe with the environment, and to make partnerships makes much more possible than trying to solve and to organize everything yourself. And of course, the internal trainings. So my conclusion is innovation of learning methods, first of all, is highly needed, because I think in terms of effective learning, many academic institutions are too traditional, but to do it, you need another approach as a system, of an academic institution, the system of the business model and the system of rewarding, for example. Training is needed for people. You cannot ask them to innovate and to use other didactical concepts without training. And of course, outside also to talk with accreditation bodies and with associations of accreditation bodies, because they're also a lot. I think I did it in half an hour, 30 seconds less. Thank you for your attention. I started my speech with what is ABIS, supporting innovations in academia and together with corporates. And you see my email. If you are interested, just drop me a message and I will come back. Thank you for your attention.
Many thanks, Dr. Matzar, for your excellent presentation. I will
Thank you.
come back to you at the end of the session to answer a few questions.
Okay,
Our
thank you.
second presenter will be Dr. Ghita BENKIRANE from France. She is General Director of Art and Management Company. Welcome, Kiran, and thanks for accepting our invitation. Your presentation's title is The Contribution of Neuroscience to Improve the Quality of Education. You prefer speak in French.
Bonjour à tout le monde. Merci, Monsieur Nagy, de votre accueil. J'aurais pu le faire en anglais, mais je pense que c'est plus agréable peut-être en français. Je vais partager mon écran.
C'est bon.
Donc, c'est très bien que je passe après à Evo parce que je vais expliquer par les neurosciences ce qui se passe dans notre cerveau et comment arriver à mieux apprendre et mieux apprendre à apprendre. Donc déjà, une rapide présentation de notre cerveau. Ça, c'est une photographie en IRM, en résonance magnétique de notre cerveau. Donc depuis qu'on a pu identifier les différentes zones qui s'activent dans notre cerveau grâce à l'IRM, on a vraiment développé la connaissance de notre cerveau. Donc déjà, c'est une machine très complexe, 100 milliards de neurones qui sont des cellules nerveuses. Donc il n'y a pas de muscles dans notre cerveau. Ça ne sert à rien de muscler notre cerveau. Et heureusement, sinon on aurait des crampes. Et surtout 1 million de milliards de connexions synaptiques, c'est-à-dire des connexions entre neurones. Alors, par rapport à l'éducation, il faut vraiment différencier l'éducation des enfants de l'éducation des adultes, puisque notre cerveau se développe jusqu'à 15 à 20 ans. Donc, la façon dont on va enseigner sera forcément différente. Ma spécialité est la formation des adultes, et c'est apprendre à désapprendre certaines routines cognitives, mais ce que je vais vous partager est bien sûr valable pour les enfants également. De façon très simple, on partage le cerveau en 3 grandes parties, le cerveau reptilien, limbique et cortex ou néocortex. En fait, le nom reptilien, limbique et néocortex vient du développement de l'être humain. Le cerveau reptilien et le cerveau limbique sont automatiques, donc non conscients, et seul le néocortex est conscient. Donc, le reptilien, c'est vraiment le cerveau de la survie, c'est celui qui prend en commande nos actions en moment de peur, de plaisir, de fuite, ce sont les réflexes physiologiques. Le limbique, c'est là où on va stocker notre mémoire, et c'est ce qui nous intéresse en éducation. C'est là où on va stocker tous les apprentissages, toutes les acquisitions, mais c'est aussi le cerveau émotionnel et des relations sociales. Et puis le néocortex, ça sera le cerveau qui va s'adapter au changement, c'est lui qui va apprendre des nouvelles choses. Donc en fait, quand on apprend quelque chose de nouveau, ça passe d'abord par le néocortex et ensuite on le stocke dans le néolimbique. Tout ça, c'est pour économiser l'oxygène du cerveau, puisque le néocortex consomme 80% d'oxygène de notre cerveau. Donc, quand vous avez appris à conduire, par exemple, vous étiez concentré, vous utilisez le néocortex, et ensuite, c'est le limbique qui stocke l'information, et c'est pour ça que de temps en temps, on arrive à la maison en se demandant « mais comment je suis arrivé là ?» puisque c'est le pilote automatique qui a pris le dessus. Et donc, en fait, Daniel Kahneman, qui est prix Nobel d'économie, a définit ce système 1 et 2 qui décrit ces 2 vitesses de la pensée, donc le système automatique et le système 1 qui est très rapide et le système 2 qui est conscient, délibéré, qui est un peu plus lent, mais on parle de quelques millisecondes et on a 99% de nos activités quotidiennes qui sont automatiques et on a plus de 60 000 pensées par jour, 2500 par heure. Donc quand on enseigne à des enfants, à des étudiants ou à des adultes, pendant qu'ils sont physiquement présents dans la salle, leur esprit est ailleurs, leurs pensées vagabondent sans arrêt. Et il y a donc 2 difficultés, c'est de les aider à mieux mémoriser. Donc effectivement, le système de rétention que vous a présenté à Evo est très important, puisque c'est par l'action qu'on va beaucoup plus mémoriser. Mais la deuxième chose, c'est qu'il faut capter leur attention. Et capter l'attention de quelqu'un demande de l'énergie. Donc en fait, on travaille en neurosciences sur ce qu'on appelle l'espace de travail neuronal global, qui provient des recherches de Jean-Pierre Changeux, Stanislaw et Kersberg, qui ont défini les différentes zones du cerveau de façon assez schématique. Et donc, on va définir 5 grandes approches. On va parler des systèmes perceptuels, donc la perception, les 5 sens qui agissent dans le présent au moment d'une situation, la mémoire à court et long terme, donc ça c'est par rapport au passé, le système de valeur, à quoi on donne de la valeur, le système d'attention, sur quoi on va se focaliser, et le système moteur qui est la prise de décision et d'action. Donc voilà ce système, cet espace de travail neuronal, et donc je vais vous présenter chacune de ces pétales. Donc sachant que la perception, c'est vraiment les 5 sens, c'est comment on perçoit aussi bien au niveau auditif, visuel, mais aussi au niveau de l'odorat, au niveau du goût. Et le cerveau capte sans arrêt des informations via ces 5 sens, voire plus, parce qu'il y a le sens proprioceptif également qui est important. La mémoire, donc mémoire court terme, mémoire long terme, je vais vous expliquer comment ça fonctionne. Le système attentionnel, sur quoi notre cerveau porte son attention, le système de valeur, et donc la prise de décision qui est l'action, avec l'importance de la rétroaction pour pouvoir apprendre. Donc, tous ces systèmes sont interconnectés et agissent en même temps. Simplement, je vais le découper pour vous donner plus de compréhension, des clés de lecture de comment votre cerveau fonctionne et comment faire en sorte que ce cerveau puisse être intéressé d'apprendre, comment apprendre à mieux apprendre et comment le système se met en place. Donc la perception, selon l'angle de vision dans lequel on se place, on pourrait le voir de face ou de profil. Et en fait, tout dépend de notre angle de vision. Et c'est important de faire en sorte de pouvoir vraiment capter les 5 sens en situation d'enseignement, d'éducation, pour attirer plus l'attention de l'apprenant sur le contenu. Et le cerveau est sans arrêt en train d'avoir des mouvements inconscients. Il fait des calculs inconscients, il a de l'attention inconsciente, des compréhensions inconscientes. Rappelez-vous que 99% de nos cerveaux est en mode automatique et donc on est sans arrêt en train d'avoir des sentiments, des émotions, des lectures inconscientes. Et selon ce qui nous arrive, selon ce qu'on capte au niveau de nos 5 sens, ça va agir sur différentes zones du cerveau. En bas à droite, vous voyez que les mots émouvants vont aller agir sur des zones arrière du cerveau. On va travailler aussi dans l'apprentissage, on va travailler sur des synonymes. Et différentes zones vont être donc sollicitées dans notre cerveau. Donc, ce qui est important, c'est de solliciter une autre perception au travers des 5 sens. Quand je fais des formations adultes, j'amène parfois les gens à l'extérieur. D'abord, du fait du contexte qui est important, l'environnement est important et j'y reviendrai, mais aussi pour stimuler les 5 sens, pas uniquement l'ouïe et la vision, pour vraiment ressentir et goûter, apprécier le contenu de la formation. Le système de la mémoire. Donc, le système de la mémoire, c'est ce qui nous intéresse le plus dans l'apprentissage, forcément. Et on a différents types de mémoire. On a d'abord des mémoires de connaissances et des mémoires de compétences. Donc, des mémoires de connaissances, on va parler de mémoire épisodique, donc des mémoires qui sont liées à un épisode, dans un contexte très précis. Par exemple, si je vous demande ce que vous avez fait lors de votre anniversaire l'année dernière, vous allez réactiver cette mémoire. Ensuite, on a la mémoire sémantique, qui sont les connaissances générales sur le monde, où se trouve l'Allemagne, connaissance d'histoire, de géographie, de littérature. Ensuite, on a la mémoire perceptive, on a des souvenirs d'images, de sons. On sait que l'image de l'odorat est la mémoire la plus profonde, et c'est pour ça que parfois, quand vous arrivez quelque part, vous sentez une odeur, vous dites « Ah, mais ça me rappelle quelque chose, mais je ne sais pas quoi ». Et la perception permet de réactiver la mémoire. Rappelez-vous la Madeleine de Proust. En termes de compétences, on est dans un apprentissage de comment faire les choses. Donc, un apprentissage procédural. Par exemple, apprendre à faire du vélo, à conduire, à parler en public, à résoudre des problèmes. Donc, tout ce qui est résolution de problèmes, décision, c'est du cognitif, c'est-à-dire c'est lié à la connaissance et à l'analyse. On a également différents types d'intelligence, mais j'en parlerai pas là, puisque j'ai peu de temps, mais on a 8 intelligences différentes. Et en termes de situation dans le cerveau, nos mémoires vont être à différents endroits. Ce qui est très important au niveau du cerveau, c'est la zone de l'hippocampe, qui se situe dans le limbique, et le thalamus. L'hippocampe qui va notamment être responsable de la production de neurotransmetteurs. Alors, très important, on a 4 façons d'apprendre. La première, c'est l'instruction venant d'autrui. On apprend à écrire, on apprend une langue, on apprend à faire du vélo. La deuxième, c'est le mimétisme. Donc, on va en fait faire appel à nos neurones miroirs. C'est pour ça qu'on a l'accent de nos parents. C'est pour ça que dans une entreprise, on va utiliser le même vocabulaire. On va avoir des comportements assez identiques. Et puis, troisième façon, c'est l'essai-erreur. On est obligé de faire des erreurs pour pouvoir apprendre. C'est pour ça qu'on dit qu'il n'y a pas d'erreur, mais que des expériences. On a dû apprendre à tomber pour pouvoir marcher. Et la personne doit faire des erreurs pour vraiment capitaliser sur ce qu'elle n'a pas compris, pour comprendre ce qu'elle a à comprendre. D'où l'impact sur le système de notation. Quand on note des élèves sur leurs erreurs, ça ne les encourage pas à faire des erreurs. Mais l'adulte, c'est pareil. Donc, c'est vraiment trouver un système qui permette de noter sur la correction des erreurs, pour donner envie de comprendre de ces erreurs et donc de mieux apprendre. Et la quatrième façon qui est importante, c'est l'apprentissage de l'inhibition des apprentissages antérieurs, c'est-à-dire qu'on va changer de routine cognitive. Je ne vous l'ai pas mis ici, mais il y a le Stroop test que tout le monde connaît, c'est des mots qui sont écrits dans des couleurs et on demande aux personnes de donner la couleur des mots et le cerveau va se forcer à lire le mot plutôt que dire la couleur, sauf s'il est concentré, parce qu'on a l'automatisme de la lecture. Pareil, si on vous donne un texte avec des lettres en désordre, vous allez pouvoir le lire parce que le cerveau va capter en fait l'ensemble du mot et va restituer la lecture correcte. Donc l'apprentissage de l'inhibition des apprentissages antérieurs, c'est important sur l'apprentissage des adultes, mais l'essai-erreur est quelque chose d'important à valoriser même chez l'enfant. On a 3 catalyseurs de mémorisation, l'émotion, le contexte et la répétition. Donc la répétition, on connaît, à force de réviser ces tables de multiplication, on les apprend pour que ça devienne un nouvel automatisme. Le contexte est très important puisque le contenant est plus important que le contenu. On va se rappeler, ça va réactiver notre mémoire. D'ailleurs, quand la mémoire est émotionnelle, comme sur la photo, vous voyez les Twin Centers, donc tout le monde sait ce qu'ils ont fait le 11 septembre, enfin ceux de notre génération. Donc la mémoire émotionnelle va réactiver la connaissance à apprendre. C'est pour ça que quand on fait des ateliers créatifs, donc Ivo parlait de créativité tout à l'heure et de l'importance du contexte, c'est essentiel pour pouvoir ancrer la mémoire. Quand on apprend l'alphabet en musique, par des comptines, par des jeux, donc tout ce qui est contexte extérieur va permettre de réactiver cette mémoire. Et la mémoire est une transformation physiologique du cerveau. C'est une réelle modification anatomique. En fait, là, on a un neurone avec son noyau, on a un autre neurone de l'autre côté avec des récepteurs. Et en fait, ce sont des échanges de neurotransmetteurs qui vont catalyser la connexion entre deux neurones, notamment la sérotonine, qui est un neurotransmetteur très important. Et la mémoire à court terme va se faire parce qu'il y a une connexion synoptique qui va se faire. Et donc, il y a une libération accrue de glutamate. Quand il y a une mémoire à long terme, c'est-à-dire qu'il va y avoir des excroissances qui vont se faire au niveau du neurone, exactement comme un arbre avec des branches. Et plus la mémoire est à long terme, plus il y a d'excroissance. C'est pour ça que quand il y a des maladies neurophysiologiques type Alzheimer, en fait, la personne se rappelle d'une mémoire à long terme, mais pas à court terme. Et quand on est fatigué, on a tendance à oublier où on vient de poser ses clés ou son téléphone, parce qu'il y a moins de transmission, on est en manque peut-être de magnésium qui va catalyser cet échange de neurotransmetteurs. Donc il faut comprendre que la mémoire étant une transformation anatomique, on peut toujours construire des nouvelles mémoires. Ce qui est très important, c'est la neuroplasticité du cerveau. Il faut savoir qu'on peut fabriquer des neurones jusqu'à la fin de notre vie si on a une hygiène correcte du cerveau, notamment une hygiène du corps normale, bien dormir. Les rêves sont très importants, la nuit est très importante, c'est là où le cerveau fonctionne le plus, c'est là où il va fixer la mémoire de la journée, il va revisiter sa journée, et donc il va fixer la mémoire. Aussi, beaucoup boire d'eau, l'eau est très importante, et surtout toujours être curieux, découvrir des nouvelles choses, apprendre des nouvelles choses. Le fait d'apprendre sans arrêt permet de stimuler la neuroplasticité du cerveau. Donc l'actualisation des connaissances, comment elle se fait? C'est un passage sans arrêt entre le néocortex et le limbique. En fait, l'hippocampe en orange ici va travailler de concert avec le néocortex et donc il va construire cette connaissance conceptuelle pour un objet donné. Et donc, quand les objectifs vont changer, c'est le néocortex qui va se réadapter à un nouveau contexte et qui va restocker grâce à l'hippocampe une nouvelle mémoire. Quand il y a un changement, par exemple avec le Covid, on a dû apprendre à travailler autrement, et on a stimulé notre néocortex pour trouver de nouvelles façons de travailler. Et dès qu'il y a une contrainte, en fait, ça stimule la créativité puisque ça nous oblige à trouver des nouvelles façons de penser et de faire. Et donc, stimuler la créativité est très bon pour l'apprentissage. Par ailleurs, il faut savoir qu'on a plusieurs types de mémoire. On a la mémoire du présent, on a la mémoire du passé, ce qu'on appelle la mémoire du futur en neurosciences, c'est-à-dire la façon dont on planifie. Et on ne peut pas planifier, on ne peut pas se projeter dans un avenir, dans un futur, autrement que ce que nous connaissons déjà. Donc si on veut changer la mémoire du futur, donc la façon d'anticiper, il va falloir changer la perception du présent. Et ce qui est très important, c'est de comprendre que c'est la mémoire qui va nous permettre d'élaborer notre futur. Donc, quand un élève va apprendre une façon de faire, de résoudre un problème, c'est ce qui va l'aider à élaborer une solution pour un autre problème similaire dans le futur. Et ce sont les mêmes zones du cerveau, c'est-à-dire que la zone du futur, la mémoire du futur, se trouve dans la même zone que la mémoire du passé. Donc, comment faire pour aider à apprendre ? C'est déjà d'avoir un cercle, un feedback, de la rétroaction entre la mémoire épisodique, donc construire un futur, construire une connaissance grâce à un storytelling, grâce à un contexte, enrichir la mémoire sémantique et transformer la mémoire perceptive, accéder à des nouvelles perceptions. Et là, on va transformer notre mémoire procédurale, donc notre façon de faire. Et ce qui est important, c'est sans arrêt de faire un feedback entre l'imagination et la pratique, d'où l'importance d'apprendre en faisant. Après, on peut parler d'inné et d'acquis, le cerveau est modelé par le passé, le cerveau est autodidacte par nature, c'est-à-dire qu'il évolue tout seul, on ne lui dit pas d'apprendre telle ou telle chose, il le fait de façon complètement automatique, les neurones s'organisent de façon automatique, et les apprentissages se font en associant sans arrêt contexte et connaissances. Donc des connaissances seules, sans contexte, sans mise en pratique, ne permettent pas d'acquérir un apprentissage. Et donc, on évalue les situations à partir de ce que nous avons en nous, en mémoire. Donc, en résumé, la mémoire, c'est modifier son cerveau. On n'appelle pas un souvenir, on le construit. Et on a 3 boosters, les émotions, le contexte, la répétition. Et on fait appel à notre mémoire pour envisager le futur. Et ce que disait Einstein, un problème créé ne peut être résolu en réfléchissant de la même manière qu'il a été créé. Troisième élément, c'est le système attentionnel. Sur quoi portons-nous notre attention ? Donc, pareil, ce sont des zones différentes du cerveau qui vont être activées en fonction de soit c'est une zone d'habitude, donc des choses répétitives, soit des choses d'utilité générale, parce que c'est une connaissance générale qu'on doit avoir, soit une utilité immédiate, et donc là, on va plutôt stimuler le néocortex. Et donc, le système attentionnel va être différent parce qu'on ne peut pas être en même temps voir le détail et le global, des choses factuelles et des idées, des traditions et des nouveautés, du passé et du futur. Donc, c'est important de forcer cette attention au niveau de l'apprentissage pour que la personne voit la situation sous différents angles. Exactement comme une statue, quand on la voit de face, ce n'est pas la même vision que de profil. Par contre, pour être attentif, il faut que le cerveau soit dans un état de calme et de pleine présence, de pleine vigilance. Et c'est vrai que d'être concentré, ça demande de l'attention, de l'énergie. C'est fatigant. C'est pour ça qu'un élève qui est à l'école de 8h à 18h, c'est beaucoup trop fatigant. Il y a un moment, il sature. En formation d'adulte, c'est pareil. Il faut changer de rythme à peu près toutes les 40 minutes et pour pouvoir permettre au cerveau de se réoxygéner. Il vaut mieux faire plusieurs petites pauses qu'une seule grande pause, par exemple. Ensuite, nous avons nos biais cognitifs. On va se rappeler des choses les plus récentes, par exemple, parce qu'on est surchargé d'informations et de plus en plus. C'est ce qu'on appelle l'infobésité. On a besoin d'agir vite. On a besoin de donner du sens à des choses qui n'ont pas de sens. Et on a beaucoup de choses à mémoriser. Donc, nous avons tous des biais cognitifs et c'est normal parce que c'est notre cerveau automatique. C'est tout à fait naturel. Simplement, il faut en être vigilant quand on doit mettre en œuvre certaines connaissances. L'évaluation, j'espère que je ne parle pas trop vite, mais je voulais vraiment vous présenter l'ensemble de l'espace de travail neuronal. Comment est-ce qu'on donne de la valeur ? Qu'est-ce qui est important pour nous ? Et là rentre en jeu le système de récompense. On a tous un système de récompense donc, qui est stimulé par l'amygdale. Et en fait, c'est la dopamine et notamment un neurotransmetteur très important, parce que c'est ce qui va nous donner le plaisir d'apprendre. C'est le principe des jeux vidéo, c'est le principe de Netflix, c'est l'envie de toujours de plus de challenge, de se comparer à d'autres. Il y a plusieurs techniques qu'on utilise en e-learning pour donner l'envie aux personnes de continuer leur parcours, parce qu'on voit que beaucoup de gens en individuel lâchent leur parcours en e-learning, parce que ce qui est important, c'est créer aussi du lien social. Donc l'ocytocine qui n'est pas représentée ici est importante. On a besoin aussi d'être en vigilance, on a besoin de sérotonine qui nous va nous donner vraiment l'impulsion d'apprendre. Donc le plus important, c'est vraiment d'avoir cette envie d'apprendre pour pouvoir capter encore plus notre système d'évaluation, mais aussi d'attention. Et l'action, c'est la mise en action, c'est-à-dire qu'on va passer de la pensée à l'action. Et ce qui est très important, c'est le mouvement. Le mouvement, pour le cerveau, c'est mettre le cerveau en mouvement. Donc, on peut le mettre en mouvement par la pensée, en le forçant à voir des situations de façon différente. Il y a l'exercice du portrait chinois qui est intéressant à mettre en place. On peut visiter selon différentes échelles sociales, d'autres cultures. C'est vraiment forcer la personne à voir les choses dans d'autres angles. On peut aussi étudier différentes représentations entre la carte et l'itinéraire. Enfin, c'est le détail global du concept à l'expérimentation et vice-versa. C'est-à-dire, on part de l'exemple, on sort une théorie, de la théorie à l'exemple. On peut changer de niveau de sens. Et puis, la façon d'analyser aussi la situation. Une approche plutôt analytique, une approche plutôt systémique, et de regarder les liens, les interactions de façon différente. Et prendre en compte les points de vue des autres. D'où l'importance de travailler en petits groupes aussi, parce que les travaux de groupe nous permettent de voir les points de vue des autres et d'aller au fond des choses. Alors, très important, les émotions. Émotion vient du latin qui veut dire motio, qui veut dire mouvement. En fait, l'émotion permet de mettre le cerveau en mouvement. Si on n'avait pas d'émotion, on ne pourrait pas prendre de décision. Et ça a été prouvé par Antonio Damasio. Il n'y a pas de décision sans processus émotionnel. Alors, tout le monde se bat pour gérer ses émotions. Laisser tomber, c'est pas possible parce que c'est automatique. Par contre, on peut gérer l'expression d'émotions. Donc, le désir va nous donner envie d'explorer, d'approcher. C'est pour ça que développer la motivation et l'envie d'apprendre est importante. La colère va s'exprimer par de l'agressivité, la peur par de la fuite, mais la fuite, on ne part pas en courant, on n'est plus dans la jungle, mais on va faire de la procrastination, on va reporter un travail à plus tard. Et puis la détresse, c'est les pleurs, on a besoin de lien social. D'où l'importance du lien social, même quand on travaille à distance. Donc de bien distinguer les émotions qui sont en bleu de l'expression d'émotions de ce qui sont en noir. Et donc voilà, la situation est ici. On a deux schémas de pensée. D'abord le schéma A, on va se projeter dans des représentations du futur, mais on va prendre une décision en passant par la mémoire émotionnelle, ou bien on va directement via la mémoire émotionnelle. Et les personnes qui ont des problèmes qui n'ont pas d'émotion, et ça arrive, c'est des pathologies neuronales, n'arrivent pas à prendre de décision parce que c'est l'émotion qui va nous donner la décision. Donc le but, en fait, pour enseigner autrement, c'est de stimuler le préfrontal, qui est ici, et pour ça, de développer une posture créative et vivre en conscience de soi. Et donc, on va travailler sur des intelligences créatives, c'est-à-dire on va faire un détour d'une solution plutôt classique par un détour artistique, littéraire ou autre, pour voir le problème dans un autre sens. Et le plus important est vraiment de donner envie, et j'aime beaucoup cette phrase de Saint-Exupéry pour conclure: si tu veux construire un bateau, ne rassemble pas tes hommes et tes femmes pour leur donner des ordres, pour expliquer chaque détail, pour leur dire où trouver chaque chose. Si tu veux construire un bateau, fais naître dans leur cœur le désir de la mer. Donc c'est de vraiment donner l'intérêt, l'utilité de cet apprentissage pour donner du sens. Voilà, je vous remercie et je suis à votre écoute pour les questions.
Merci beaucoup, Madame BENKIRANE, pour cette excellente présentation, très riche.
Pas trop rapide.
Je reviendrai vers vous pour poser quelques questions à la fin de la session. Our third presenter is Dr. Hassan SABERE from Kazakhstan. He is professor at Florida Atlantic University. Welcome, Dr. SABERE, and many thanks for accepting our invitation. Your presentation's title is How Can Schools Adopt a Contextual Model Using the Marzano model?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, BENKIRANE. Thank you, Mr. Abdel Nasser, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be at this gathering. Let me share my presentation with you first. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
If you have difficulties to share your screen, I can do it for you.
I found the file, and because this is a little different than the Zoom.
But it's the same principle.
Okay, it's processing. It's taking a minute. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. You see only the screen. You see only the presentation, right? You don't see my any other things. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Hassan SABERE. I am actually originally born in Morocco, and I've migrated to the US when I was very young, and my education is US education. I've been in education for almost 30 years, and now I work for Nazarbayev Intellectual Schools in Kazakhstan as deputy director. My presentation today evolves around what characterizes an effective teacher. And this is a very, very important subject because it actually evolves around the pillars of education, which are teachers. And first, I would like to begin my presentation by saying that my role at this conference is to bring educators' voices and highlight teachers' perspectives. We all know that reforming education system is a challenging endeavor. So many stakeholders have different interests and commitments. However, education systems are social engineering ecosystems, and they improve when foundations are strongly built. The best education systems in the world are built bottom up, where teachers can participate in leading the change for the children's sake. As I begin my presentation, I wanted also to mention that teachers play a very important role in the education system. And for every education system to succeed, teachers have to succeed first. My outline for the presentation, as you can see, it involves 5 items. Personality, the question is personality traits or skills. How much impact can a teacher have on student performance? Why are teachers so important in the educational ecosystem? What personality traits are most related to effective teaching? What skills are most related to effective teaching? What personality traits or skills a teacher needs to be effective? And finally, we will unwrap the Marzano model, and then we will have a little conclusion. Personal attributes or skills, is it the right question to ask? This question has perplexed many generations of researchers, and many researchers over the years try to get to the bottom of really what makes a really big difference in children's learning. Is it and the students' learning? Is it a teacher's personal attributes or skills? That's the essential question requiring deep thinking and research to answer. For years, many anecdotal, or I call them inspirational stories, dominated the narrative on the practice of teaching. I remember when I started teaching in South Florida, and I was going through a training, one of the leading trainer once told me, she pulled me to the side, she says, Hassan, if you want to become a really good educator, you have to use the 3 R's. And I said, what are they? She said, you have to build relationships, focus on relevance, and increase the rigor. So that statement stayed with me, and actually that statement touched me, and I tried to apply it in my classrooms over the years. And actually, during my first 3 or 4 years, I was a little zealous in trying to implement this wisdom statement. But after 4 years, I realized that my students were not performing as high as I could help them, although I was actually utilizing or following the model that my mentor gave me. And over the years, years after years, with experience, I started learning that it takes more than actually personal attributes to help students achieve at higher competencies. How much impact can a teacher have on student performance? The questions has triggered serious discussions in academia and beyond in the last 50 years or so. However, there were several difficulties in qualifying and quantifying teachers' impact on students' learning outcomes. Why? Because teaching is a very, very difficult. Teaching students K-12 is a very difficult endeavor, because in a classroom there are many, many variables that are in the classroom that are not easy to control or to manipulate. And actually, that's why we see many teachers are overwhelmed, and sometimes they get burned out and leave the profession. Teaching and learning are basically 2 faces of the same coin. We teach and learn at the same time. Teachers, I always say it, the most important thing that as a teacher, that I really appreciate the most is I learn from my students, because it is like my own lab. Every year when I come in and I teach students, actually I learn so much about their development, their cognitive development, their behavioral development, as well as their learning, like the readiness, their learning preferences, as well as their learning profiles. And this enriched me year after year, because I always take notes of how students learn in our schools, in our classes. Since the mid-60s, the quantity of research targeted toward understanding and measuring the scale of impact teachers have on students' gains grow exponentially. There was a tremendous amount, there is a treasure trove of research that has been accumulated from the mid-60s to, I would say, 2010. Educational policymakers and education stakeholders began to appreciate that to achieve high quality education, teachers' effectiveness was at the heart of any educational reform or improvement to add value to schools, system, and nation. I am speaking in the American context. Different countries have different contexts. I'm only here speaking to actually the American context. As you can see in the slide, McRae has highlighted some of the finding that Mr. Robert Marzano has found over the years, that actually teachers have only 13% influence on the success of learning of their students. Schools make up 7%. The student himself make 80%. Now, when you look at this, for example, research, it looks deceiving. However, when Mr. Marzano digged really deep, he realized that when he really researched and he went deeper into the heart of every research, he found out that actually this 13% makes tremendous difference in allowing students to achieve higher performance in learning gains and in learning growth. And once we had a conversation about these findings, and I was in a meeting once, and Mr. Robert Marzano was given a lecture, and I asked him a question about how come that teachers influence the students' success in learning girls only 13%. How could that be possible? And then he mentioned to me, he says, you have to wait until I actually show you other research that it's actually articulate precisely what does 13% means. And then, here we go. Now, if you look at this graph, for example, teachers' effectiveness greatly impacts students' achievements. It is clear from this depiction of Marzano's finding that even though many failures in schools and systems, teachers' impact, if those failures in schools and systems can minimize learning growth, however, effective teachers in those schools can help improve students' learning growth. Therefore, students can achieve higher level of development regardless of institutional context. And for example, if you look at this chart right here, as you can see, students who is actually in a school that is in the 37th percentile, most effective schools, and students sitting in a classroom with the most effective teacher actually achieve 96th percentile growth. For example, a student who is sitting in a school that is least effective achieves 30% growth. That's a natural growth without anything. And a student who is sitting in most effective teacher in a poorly, in a very less effective school actually achieves 63%. As you can see, the difference is 60%. So a teacher's impact on the students, even in a least effective school, is very, very high. And it is the same happening in schools which are highly effective. I teach at, I work at Nazarbayev Intellectual Schools, and it is a very selective schools where, going back to what Dr. Ghita said, I call them myelinated children, highly myelinated children, because they have very high IQ, and those children have they have great potential to learn. However, from my observations over the years and doing research in my institution, I realized even those students with very high IQs, once we put them in a class with least effective teachers, their learning growth diminishes over the year. Now, I go back to the point that Dr. Ivo mentioned before, is contact hours. This this depiction here is very, very important, because this depiction it tells us what does a job of a teacher entails. And this is, I always call them the trenches. This is, you know, away from academia, but this is really, really the trenches. This is where the rubber hits the pavement, as they say in the US. Line of contacts between the students and the teacher. These interactions are very, very important, because these interactions, once we define them in monetary terms, we know that the biggest bulk of education goes into these interactions, or we call them contact hours. These contact hours are budget drainers, and everyone is trying its best to ensure that the allocation of resources for this line of interaction is adequate, and it is provided with efficiency and accountability. Because here we talk about return on investment, and I just want, you know, talking to experts, for example, the United States spends over $752 billion a year. I think this year maybe they already reached like $850 billion a year on their public school to teach their 48 million students, children. So these are huge budgets. And this is one of the reasons that researchers, they worked so hard to understand what makes a teacher an effective teacher. Because once they are able to acquire as much research and get behind and get information that they can provide to the policymakers, they can ensure that the policymakers can use this information to actually improve the education system. And United States, we've been struggling a lot with our education system, because the context of society is very complex. It is a culture that it is very diverse, not only diverse in racial, religious, but it is diverse in intelligence, because and these are things that lots of research went into to understand what makes a teacher an effective teacher who can help all these different spectrums of learning abilities. There were 4 models that existed over the years, especially from the 60s, that have been applied in United States to actually evaluate the effectiveness and the performance of teachers. Interest in teaching practices and behavior began in the 60s. Researchers took the initiative to study complex dynamics of classrooms. There were too many variables to sort through. It was a challenging endeavor. However, as of the last 20 years, many researchers like Dr. Carol Dweck and Hammond Gardner, among others, have produced high-quality research. But there was a problem. The problem is the research was only articulated toward academia. So academia was able to understand their verbiage, and the terms they were using, it was not actually understood by the practitioners in schools. And many institutions have used the findings to accommodate in their school improvement plans and decision-making processes. But it was actually error. They did everything through trial and error. First, they implemented the first performance criteria of the performance observation. It was called the value added. And it was produced actually by Rand Corporation. And this model was used, and is still used in some schools and institutions, to measure teachers' effect on students' achievement by using various measures to predict each student's test scores and compare against student actual score. And then we went from there to the observational model. And that's the one that actually I went through when I was doing my training in the late 90s. I mean late 80s and early 90s. Formal or informal observations of teaching occur in a classroom or other learning environment. The observations results provide teachers with constructive critical feedbacks to improve their classrooms management and instructional tasks and events. However, each school developed its observation criteria from what the research have found. And everything was based on research. However, schools did a terrible job translating the research into concrete steps implemented in schools. Then we went to what we call the framework model, which it was more comprehensive because it involves what we call planning. The observations evolve around planning, preparation, classroom environment, instruction, as well as professional responsibilities. In 2010, help came, and that was called Marzano model. This model was actually a game changer. Why would I say a game changer? Because Marzano actually, he did not actually make most of the research, but what he did, he actually collected all the research that was available, and he was able to package it and to provide it to the teachers and institution to use first as self-study, and then as observational tools to provide feedback for teachers. Now, I'm going to be very brief here. It's the problem that most educators in schools over the years have been, they were very frustrated because it seems like until Marzano's model came up, there were too much vagueness in the terms used, that the teacher has to show enthusiasm, which is, yes, these are very important personal traits. Credibility, these are very noble traits, and teachers should adhere to all these, but they are not concrete tasks that teachers need to take to use in their practice on their daily basis. And also the skills that most of the project coming from districts came about, they will still have vagueness, a lot of vagueness to them, such as, clarity, if you use questioning, if you use, for example, you have to provide feedback, but even the description of all these terms, they were not really concise enough, with clarity enough and succinct enough to actually provide teachers with a roadmap that they can use on a single basis, and actually they can evaluate themselves and they evaluate the performance of students when using these skills. Marzano, as I said, was a game changer because, first of all, when his model was rolled out, most of the districts were actually, they did not know how to handle it because they needed a paradigm repositioning. They needed a paradigm shift, which means they needed to take the whole model and provide it to teachers and provide teachers professional development. So teachers can go through self-study first before using it as a model for observations. This is how Marzano broke down the process. And this has made it very, very interesting for teachers. again, what Marzano model stand out for is for self-study and evaluation, as a process for self-study and evaluation with concise tasks that teachers, and descriptive. It is a very descriptive model. It was actually the first descriptive model in the United States that teachers were able to relate to, accommodate, and embrace with, because it uses the verbiage that teachers were familiar with. It is systematic, descriptive, and it prescribes in details the tasks, events, and behaviors teachers should carry out to achieve effectiveness. So he broke down good teaching practices in 4 domains. Domain 1, classroom strategies. Domain 2, preparing and planning. Domain 3, reflecting on teaching. Domain 4, collegiality and professionalism. This is the model. And what happened with this model is, I'm not going to go over a lot of, because it's a big model. But for example, if you look at the different segments, this is the segment that really, it gets my attention. Lesson segment, which is addressing content. For example, right here in item number 9, it says chunking content into digestible bites. So he was one of the very first people who actually articulated what teachers should do in a very clear way. And as you can see, he also set up a system that teachers should follow. For example, when addressing contact, teachers should help students interact with the new knowledge, practice and deepen new knowledge. Dr. Ghita talked about repetition, which is deep practice. Deep practice increases myelination. Helping students generate hypotheses about the new knowledge. So as you can see, he was the first individual who designed a system that speaks to what the teachers want to hear, instead of the vagueness that has actually dominated the educational system over the years. Because I am an administrator, and I always, when I go to the classroom, I try to actually minimize, I try to reduce less vagueness when giving, when interacting with my teachers, so I can exactly tell them what is the part of the lesson that they need to work on. And I have to be very precise with them. So these are very important. Not all of them have to be applied every day. But if a teacher can use this model, if a teacher can look at this model and educate himself or herself using this model, they can become very effective teachers, because these are the elements that makes a teacher a great teacher who can help his students or her students achieve high performance. And we use this system in our school. And our school, for example, we have 22 schools. Nazarbayev Intellectual School students, actually, the school is ranked number 35, the highest in PISA. And our average SAT is 1450 from 1600. 1450 is actually average to be admitted to Yale or Harvard. And these are students who English is a second language. And we did that because we are using this model, Marzano model, in the school to guide teacher self-study and also to use for professional development and observation of other behaviors such as planning, preparing, reflecting, as Dr. Ivo spoke of before, and collegiality and professionalism. Again, teachers become effective practitioners through learning, practice, and experience. Charisma is fine, but charisma can go only so far. Teachers learn by doing self-study. And a good teacher, a good teacher is a teacher who reflects on his practice every single day and actually write down what's the best things that happen during the lesson session and what are the things that needs improvements. Support systems. Schools have to have a supporting systems. For example, in the United States, we use what we call response to intervention, RTI. And those programs can help students improve, but also they can help a teacher teach in a better context. That is why pastoral care in the schools is a very, very important. And more important is to have a very concrete, value-added professional development system for teachers. Finally, effective teachers practice self-study regularly using well-researched teaching strategies and learning models. Effective teachers acquire a repertoire of instructional models to carry out their duties successfully in their context. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attending to it. And if you have any question, I'll be more than happy to answer at the end of the session.
Thank you so much, Dr. SABERE, for this excellent presentation. I will come back to you at the end of the session to answer questions. Our fourth presenter will be Dr. Stanislaw from Thailand. He is professor at Assumption University. Welcome, Dr. and many thanks for accepting our invitation. Your presentation statement is New 21st Century Learning Theory for Improving STEAM.
Okay. Can you see my... oops, now then. Share my screen. Share my screen now. Share. One moment. Share screen. Share screen. This is the one I want to do. Show. For some reason, it's not showing my screen. Can you see my slides?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Okay, now.
Now, can you see?
Yes.
There we go. Except it's not using the full screen. Let me try something. How's that? Can you see that?
Yes.
Can you see my slide? Okay, then. So my name is Paul. This is my background. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Multiple awards in teaching, research, and Australian Character Citation.
But your slides are small.
Oh dear. How can I do that? My apologies here. Let's try again. Sorry for this, ladies and gentlemen. Why are my slides small? Share the screen. I'll try showing the slides then. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Is it large?
Yes.
Great. Sorry about that. Okay then. So let's keep moving on that. Why won't it go on to the next one? Now it won't click on. Here we go. I've got it. Thank you. Sorry for the delay. This is the wrong. No, this is not. This is the one that I gave you. I've modified it slightly. Could I show mine, please? I'm going to share my slides. Sorry about this, everyone. Nope, that's the wrong one. Could we cancel that one? Move from the stream. Let's try again. Share. Do I share the screen or share the slides?
It's okay. It's okay now.
Share the screen.
We see your slides.
Can you see? That is the wrong one. That is the wrong one. Never mind. I'll work with this one. So this is my background. I've worked with the National Science Foundation, IEEE, Computer Research Association, etc. And I've been a keynote speaker. So let's have the problem. The problem is learning theories. A learning theory tells you how students learn, gives you guidelines how to teach, but they're based on 20th century learning theories such as constructivism. They provide qualitative, subjective guidelines onto different interpretations. I conducted a 10-year study of over 30 STEM units in 7 institutions, 2 different countries, and they all use constructivism, and that's going to be presented at a conference on Monday. Look at this, Unit 1. It was described as outstanding, award-winning. They taught less than half the topics you would expect. They used spreadsheets instead of project management tool, which is like using a bicycle to teach swimming. The final exam was open text. Everybody passed. I gave the unit materials and textbook to a 14-year-old schoolboy, and with no preparation time, they completed the exam in 3 hours and they passed with a distinction. 100% pass rate is not a measure of quality learning outcomes. Here's another one. Introduction to Programming, undergraduate. 100% of the topics were taught. Same campus, same material, 3 different campuses, 3 different lecturers. Every campus, every lecturer, the pass rate was less than 30%. Pass rate is not, was very, very low, but they had a high standard of teaching. So the problem, if you've got a wide variations, constructivism is subjective. You've got different interpretations, you've got self-defined standards, you've got wide variations of teaching and learning outcomes. You can have a high pass rate, all you do is reduce your assessment or teaching standard. You can have a high standard and accept the low pass rate and place the responsibility on the students. Students' responsibility, students are lazy, etc. And in Australia, this is a problem. What's the way forward then? Arguably, we need a science of learning. What is science? Well, we've got a soft science, which is qualitative. It's not pejorative because humans are complex. We've got a hard science, which is quantitative. And there have been various global researches into the science of learning, such as the National Science Foundation came up with the goal of optimized learning for all, Deans for Impact, Australian Science of Learning Research Centre, etc. So, does it work? Deans of Impact came up with 6 principles and practical implementations, but they're subjective guidelines. 10 people will interpret them all differently. The SLRC came up with 12 PEN principles. These are subjective guidelines up to different interpretations. They tried to implement it in schools, but again, subjective guidelines, different interpretations. There's a lot done on brain science where you can optimize by educational tricks, and they came up with cognitive strategies, spaced practice, interleaving, retrieval practice, etc. But they're all subjective guidelines open to different interpretations. To me, the important thing is a quote by Lord Kelvin, who said, when you can measure, you know something about it. When you cannot measure it, your knowledge is of a meager and unsatisfactory kind. So it doesn't work that I can see. The Australian SLRC ceased operation, and many international science of learning research centres have ceased operation. Let's have a look at cognitive load theory then. Basically here, the knowledge to be taught is measured by the intrinsic cognitive load. That's the measure of the number of elements and element interdependencies. Low ICL has got few related elements. It's easy to teach and easy to learn. High ICL has got many interdependent elements. It's hard to teach and hard to learn. You've probably come across Bloom, but there's something called SOLA, Structure of Observed Learning Outcome, which talks about unistructural knowledge, the capital of something, one thing. Multistructural, list, describe. The objective of learning is relational knowledge, where you've got many interdependent elements where you can explain something, but this has got a high ICL, and therefore it's hard to teach and hard to learn. And therefore, not only is it hard to teach and hard to learn, you can also have cognitive gaps, because if the material's got missing elements and missing relationships, and or you've got an incorrect sequence, you exacerbate the problem. And therefore, this student schema is incomplete, inconsistent, incorrect. That's why students fail. Incorrect student schema handicaps further learning, and early learning is persistent and hard to correct. So why is this a problem? Looking at cognitive load theory, this is called a schema, which is the mental pattern. It's resident in long-term memory, which has got limited capacity and duration. It works with short-term memory, which has got limited capacity and duration. How do you learn? New knowledge is mediated by short-term memory with limited capacity and duration. You retrieve existing knowledge and you assimilate it into new knowledge. The core problem is all knowledge is mediated by short-term memory, and relational knowledge with a high ICL overloads short-term memory. Hence, it's hard to teach, hard to learn, resulting in low pass rates. Does CLT work? Well, there's been attempts to do it in Australia with cognitive load theory in schools, but they come up with strategies, and these are subjective guidelines open to different interpretations. Furthermore, in CL2, there is no direct measure of cognitive load. If you cannot measure, you cannot control, you cannot calculate, you cannot optimize. Doesn't work. Solving the problem. Cognitive load optimization, 21st century learning theory. With this, I can measure intrinsic cognitive load and I can reduce it. So I can take material with relational knowledge with a high ICL, overload short-term memory, cognitive gaps, hard to teach, hard to learn, to low ICL, no cognitive gaps, easy to teach, easy to learn. So looking at a textbook here from secondary school here, what I did was to analyze it, and I found huge cognitive gaps. Hard to teach, hard to learn. Harder than it can be. It might be simple, but it can be even harder. And the result is a student schema that is incomplete, inconsistent, incorrect. The basis of CLO is you create a concept attribute matrix and you optimize it to the lowest possible ICL, quantitatively provable. That is the basis of constructing a schema. This is the simplest possible schema. You cannot get simpler knowledge than that. That is the basis of instructional material and is the easiest teaching and learning path. Very important. You give the students this schema, and then the process of teaching and learning, they internalize it, but you've given the mental map that they are learning and what they're going to learn and how they do it. By contrasting constructivism, students you guide them to construct their own schema, which is going to be incomplete, inconsistent, incorrect, and that's why students fail. With CLO, this is the simplest possible schema. It's important. Not only is it the easiest learning path, but also it shows relationships, which is relational knowledge. It's diagrammatic. You've got concurrency. New knowledge is contextualized and it reinforces existing knowledge. It's contiguous. You can start from the very simple to the most complex. And so for a given STEM discipline, you can form a single contiguous optimized schema from a learning path from an 8-year-old to a year 12-year-old. From that, you can produce an e-learning tool. This is an example of an e-learning tool, but I'm not going to go into that. So, does it work? Let's have a look at this then. Does CLO work? Can it make it a quantitative, science-based learning method? If you look at mathematics, this was a proof of concept, small group of students, small cohort. And here for high ICL questions, statistically significant difference and an improvement. For navigation, proof of concept, one topic, small cohort, and again, statistical significant improvement for high ICL questions. Remember this one with programming? Same material, 3 campuses, 3 different lecturers, pass rate less than 30%. I took 50% of the material, converted it to CLO, and I got a 60% increase in pass rate. This is a double blind. I didn't know the exam questions and I didn't mark the exam. So have a look at Cisco. Cisco is a global academy that developed at a cost of $35 million, 300,000 students. Students works at schools, college, university. And for an entire CCNA award, I used the CLO method and then compared the results. So on Cisco here on the left, on CLO on the right. Red are the results. They were all given the same questions and I got significantly better results. But look at the contact time. Cisco students were given 100 to 140 hours. CLO students were 20 to 40 hours. So less than half the contact time, but significantly better teaching and learning outcomes. Much is made of learning technologies, and there's an important paper here from the Australian government, and they did an extensive study of exemplar schools using innovative learning technologies, and they said there is no direct link between learning and improved outcomes. No direct link. Well, with CLO, you do have it. With an e-learning tool, I gave a 1-hour lecture on a protocol using only this CLO tool at another institution, and this is the feedback I've got. I've learned more in this 1 hour than the whole of the semester. Far clearer than any Cisco material that was developed at the cost of $35 million, etc. If you want a challenge, try teaching first-year mathematics. When the mature students working full-time, family commitments, time poor, remote online, different time zones, unreliable internet, and the students are using a keyboard text chat where they can't enter math symbols. Try teaching differentiation when they can't enter a math symbol. Despite that, 100% pass rate, zero attrition, met the standard, high student satisfaction. I got no emails I do not understand. Some of the quotes from the students: perfect blend. So far, this math unit is the best unit I've ever been in, ever. Perfect. Looking at school STEM then, here's a proof of concept I did with 12 to 14-year-olds, one-day workshop, independently evaluate, and they independently came to the conclusion learning outcomes achieved. Secondary school, much more detailed analysis over a period of 9 days, a lot of things taught. And with the assessment, there were 6 questions. From the 5 questions, all students got 100%. Only question 4, only 2 students were successful in that because it was quite complex to do frame capture. Recall this: structured learned observed learning outcomes. We talked about unistructural, multistructural, relational knowledge, which is the goal, which has got a high ICL. Well, there's something called extended abstract, where you've got generalized principles applicable to new situations. And what I did at primary school level here was I took 5 textbooks for the science of energy with a high ICL. And I was interested in the science of energy. For that topic, I created a single optimized extended abstract schema. And listen, this is the simplest possible learning path. It's applicable to all forms of energy. The schema, you learn it once and you apply it to all. It contextualizes new knowledge, reinforces existing knowledge. In a proof of concept of experiment here, I taught an 8-year-old to a year 14 standard, and it works. It works because it's the easy to teach and learn, because it's the simplest possible learning path, period. So it works. Significant improvement, applicable to all STEM. It works for business studies students actually as well, but no matter. And very positive results in primary school. Further work. Within Australia, we've got something called the NAPLAN, Australian National Assessment Programme in Literacy and Numeracy. The problem is it talks about simple equations. Simple is subjective, and therefore that is problematic. And in Australia, we got the problem of the students are not doing very well in education. And then obviously we've got PISA, the Programme for International Student Assessment, comprehensive body of work, talks about cognitive demand, extensive piece of work, but I come back to this. It is subjective guidelines. When you can measure, you know something about it. When you cannot measure it, your knowledge is meager and unsatisfactory kind. So then, if we look at learning theory and learning taxonomies, we've got qualitative, constructivism, Bloom, Solo, subjective, open to different interpretations. You've got a hybrid, learning theory such as evidence-centered design. We've got domain analysis, domain modeling. They've got a very complex learning taxonomy based on statistical methods such as classical test theory, item response theory. That's fine. But unfortunately, the domain analysis and modeling is very qualitative, and it's got subjective guidelines. You can do whatever you want. You can get whatever results you want. The only, as far as I know of, qualitative learning theory and learning taxonomy is cognitive load optimization. I can quantitatively prove to you and give to you the easiest possible learning path, and it's integrated to a quantitative learning taxonomy called cognitive assessment level. And therefore, what I can produce is a single contiguous schema. You give it to students. It's the base of instructional design and teaching. It's quantitative taxonomy. It applies for all educational levels, all STEM disciplines, and all STEM-based business disciplines as well. So conclusions then. It's quantitative. It's the simplest possible schema. The optimized schema is the simplest possible learning path. It's the base of instructional materials and teaching. You give it to the students. Significant improvements in learning outcomes in considerably less time. Applicable to all STEM disciplines. you can form a contiguous schema from primary school up to university. I've got a quantitative learning assessment taxonomy, theoretically applicable to pre-primary, meets the science of learning objective, optimized learning for all. And there's no comparable learning theory I'm aware of. It's a paradigm shift. And I'd like to Professor Naj for the opportunity to present my work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pormaj, for your excellent presentation. And now I want to ask our guests a few questions. The first question to Dr. Evo Matzer. How teaching can be efficient to improve learning in order to prepare learners for jobs of the future?
I think, first of all, thank you, the other presenters, the panelists. This is quite inspiring what you shared just this last 1.5 to 2 hours. Your question is partly given by the presenters, like using teaching methods who fit the need of the student, the situation of the student, and to involve more, I would say, external stakeholders in teaching. What I presented is I presented not, as you saw, the teaching or the learning part itself, more the context of the system of, in my case, universities. It would be great if for all the presenters, if there would be if universities and faculties use the knowledge how to teach. My biggest complaint is in my world of business schools. Maybe this is different from other universities, but I know in the field of business schools that the process of teaching is not the focus of the teachers. They are selected by doing research, so they are experts, and the only thing they do is share the expertise. There's no didactical or very limited didactical concepts around it. And so that's first of all to have a higher outcome of learning, and the like the employability is based on those teaching methods, because effective learning and also learning in a way that the students can really apply what they learned. That's the key for the employability. Only knowledge, does it make sense?
Thank you so much, Dr. Matzer. J'ai maintenant une question pour Madame BENKIRANE. On accorde aujourd'hui beaucoup d'importance aux neurosciences. Jusqu'à quel point ils peuvent aider l'enseignant à différencier sa pédagogie et à l'adapter aux aptitudes d'apprentissage, aux besoins d'apprentissage des apprenants?
Merci pour la question. C'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui, de plus en plus, les neurosciences sont presque à la mode. Hein. On veut tous savoir ce qui se passe dans notre cerveau. Et comme je dis toujours, c'est bien de savoir ce qui se passe dans votre cerveau plutôt que les autres le sachent à votre place. Que ça soit dans l'éducation, que ça soit dans tous les domaines de notre vie, à partir du moment où on utilise notre cerveau, ça ne peut être qu'utile de comprendre comment notre cerveau fonctionne. Déjà pour l'enseignant lui-même, pour être vigilant sur la façon dont il communique, sur ses propres biais cognitifs, et de comprendre que chaque cerveau est unique. Et donc, la meilleure pédagogie, c'est une pédagogie différenciée, ce qui est difficile hein, quand on a une classe avec de nombreux élèves, mais au moins d'arriver à trouver les leviers pour donner envie d'apprendre. Et chacun a des leviers différents, et forcément, ça aide énormément pour mieux faire passer les messages et donner envie d'apprendre, donner envie aux élèves d'aller plus loin. Moi, je l'applique énormément dans mes formations. qu'elles soient en ligne ou à distance. Et effectivement, ça se passe très bien. J'ai eu souvent des étudiants 4 heures d'affilée où ils appréciaient vraiment mes techniques pédagogiques. Ils ne voyaient pas le temps passer puisqu'ils étaient vraiment dans une dynamique d'apprentissage avec différents types d'interactions, différentes méthodes. Voilà, donc vraiment prendre conscience des 5 pétales de l'espace de travail neuronal, être vraiment à mieux enseigner et de mieux comprendre les leviers qui donnent envie d'apprendre aux apprenants.
Merci, Madame BENKIRANE. I have a question to Dr. Sabere. How does Marzano model can be used to improve the teachers' training and their professional development? Please unmute your micro.
Yes. Marzano model is a very succinct in its tasks. The model actually identifies exactly the tasks and the behaviors that teachers should try, acquire, adopt, and use, and evaluate by becoming action researchers who actually every year they can accumulate the data from students' performance, and they can see exactly which tasks made the biggest difference in students' gains or students' learning growth. Marzano, in his books, he actually provided that each task in his model was actually quantified by the percentage in learning gains. And if teachers, for example, I'll just give you an example. For example, if I take, let's see, segment 1, and I use, for example, in segment 1, the essential question number 9, like breaking the information, chunking the information in my lesson. So if I use this as a process in my classroom, and then I can evaluate how students actually make learning gains. It is a process that it has different components, but the good thing is every school and every system has the luxury and has the capacity to go and choose what is contextual, beneficial for specific school. And that's what we did in our school system. When I started working with Nazarbayev Intellectual Schools, actually I brought the whole model, but I needed to study what are the needs. What are the needs of the students in our school who are very high IQ, well myelinated, students who are very high achievers. And then I had to take the model and extract what is relevant in our context and use it. That added value to our school and to our students. I think, personally, whether it's a school, whether it's a district, what is a system, if when developing professional development, first of all, policymakers and administrators have to define what are the elements from the model that is necessary to implement in their context. And then they can design professional development around it and allow teachers first to do self-study. Then you can use it as evaluation process.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sabere. I have a question to Dr. Paul Mach. How do neuroscience can support cognitive load optimization method?
It's a very perceptive question, if I may say so. I've read about, obviously, brain science. And as I mentioned in the paper, in brain science, they talk about how you can optimize it by tricks, by elaboration, by strategies. Mine is fundamentally different from that. I do not attempt to explain how the brain works at all. There are many. The National Science Foundation came to the conclusion after millions of dollars that brain science was a complex topic and much needed to be learned. And therefore, what I did was to say, it's like when you're teaching chemistry. You can teach chemistry without teaching quantum mechanics, which is underneath, which is underlying it all. You can teach at a high level of abstraction. Obviously, we teach and learn, and we're using our brain. The functionality of it is I go to high level abstraction and I ask the question. And the fundamental question is that we've got short-term memory, long-term memory, and the process of learning is that you have to go through short-term memory, which has got limited capacity and duration. And therefore, my approach was radically different in saying, what is it you need to teach? How can you optimize it to produce the simplest possible schema? The schema is the pattern, an intellectual pattern that you will have in your mind that you want people to have. And the problem is that if you analyze material and analyze it, it's very complicated, it's incomplete, it's inconsistent, it's incorrect. And therefore, the process then is take that material, create the simplest possible schema, and therefore that is the easiest possible learning path. So in summary then, I abstract away from the brain science and said, how can I turn it around and work within the limitations of how we learn, which is short-term memory, long-term memory, and the schema. I hope that's answered your question.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for your participation at this year's CIMQUSEF conference. Merci, Madame BENKIRANE. Thank you, Mr. Ivo Matzer. Thank you, Dr. Paul Maj. Thank you, Dr. SABERE. And many thanks for 30 speakers from 22 countries who have participated at the conference, and hope we can meet you next year in person.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.